What if I told you that everything you think you know about power is wrong? We are made to respect brute force. We believe that the person with the biggest army, the sharpest sword, or the most ruthless mind wins. We think that if you completely destroy your enemy, you erase them from history. But history has a scary psychological secret. The most terrifying empires on earth made the same deadly mistake for thousands of years with their swords drawn. They marched onto the huge, harsh Iranian plateau totally blind because of how proud they are. They were completely sure they could destroy this old civilization for good. Alexander the Great's Macedonian troops, which were heavily armed and impossible to stop, invaded these lands. The Roman legions were ruthless and well trained. They marched here expecting to win easily. Huge Arab armies came in under the strong flags of a new religion. The savage and ruthless Mongol hordes of Genghis Khan tore through these cities, leaving behind only silent ruins and dark monuments to their cruelty. If any other country on earth had this much damage, it would have disappeared forever. They would have been completely gone after taking so many deadly blows. It would have just become part of the huge mix of cultures and genes that make up human history. The great Babylonians went through this exact thing. It happened to the Hittites. It happened to the scary Assyrians. They were beaten, and then they disappeared. But something completely inexplicable happened with Iran. Something that doesn't make sense to people. The Iranians did something that no one else in the world could figure out how to do, even though they lost badly on the battlefield, saw their beautiful capitals burn to the ground, and lived through generations of harsh occupation. Not only did they survive, they also took in their conquerors. They messed with the minds of the people who beat them. Let's not think of the best psychological trap ever after a brutal invasion. Only a few decades would pass before those same terrifying, bloodthirsty invaders would change completely. They would start speaking the soft, poetic Persian language without even knowing what was going on. Instead of their own, they would start building beautiful Persian architecture. They would use the very complicated Iranian state bureaucracy to run their new empires. They would even take off their armor and wear fancy Persian clothes instead over and over again. The ancient East took in the West. It took in the fierce nomads who lived on the plains. How has this one piece of land, from the very beginning of time to the present day, been able to make every major world power respected? How did they keep their strong sense of who they were when everyone else was forgotten? And how did it happen that great Persia, a huge country with a history that goes back 5,000 years, chose to give up its famous name and make everyone else call it Iran? Welcome to the True Stories. Today, we are going to look inside the head of an empire. This is the amazing story that no one knows about, how one country came up with the idea of time as we know it today. It's about how they turned world politics into a holy war between good and evil, and most importantly, this is the story of how a civilization learned how to lose battles in order to win eternity. Watch all the way to the end, because the survival mechanism this country came up with is still in use today and is quietly changing the world around you. To really get how scary, deep and strong this civilization is, we need to go back in time a lot further than you might think. People in the Western world are usually taught a very specific version of history. We are told that Mesopotamia, which includes the lands of Sumer and Babylon or ancient Egypt, is the clear birthplace of human civilization. People who think this way about the world often put Iran on the back burner and don't think about it, and that is a huge, unforgivable wrong in history. This rough plateau was where evolution took its natural and undeniable course. Neanderthals ruled these harsh lands for 50,000 years then. Around 36,000 years ago, C.R. Magnon slowly took over, but the real revolution that changed the world didn't start until much later. Modern archaeologists have found huge urban-type settlements in the ground in Iran. Cultures like the ancient Geri and the huge Siuk ziggurat, which are between 6,000 and 7,000 years old. They found beautiful ceramic pots from the 4th millennium before Christ deep in the ground. These things are more than just old pots. There is no doubt that they are proof. They prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that evolved right here in one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations on the planet. They stood shoulder to shoulder with the great builders of Mesopotamia and the old dynasties of China. The first real major geopolitical player in these dusty lands was a country called Elam, which is now in the southwest of Iran. The beautiful capital city of Susa was its beating heart. The Elamites were very strong. They were so powerful that by the 26th century BC, They were almost telling the powerful Sumerians what to do and how to do it in the 23rd century before Christ. Something happened that changed the way people interact forever. The strong Assyrian king Naram-Sin fought against the country of Elam. In the past, a war usually ended with one side being killed or made a slave, but this fight didn't end with a weak truce or a lot of dead bodies. A brand new thing was made. Music. There was a formal written agreement. This piece of clay made sure that Elam was completely free. But it came with a huge catch. Their foreign policy had to match. Achaemenid. Take a moment to think about how heavy that is. This is the first written record of an international treaty in all of human history, long before the modern United Nations and the peace treaties of Europe. The Iranian space was at the very beginning of global diplomacy. They came up with the idea of making geopolitical deals. But when it comes to genetics, the original Elamites were much more like the people of Mesopotamia. The people we now call Iranians came to this area much later, between the 20th and 15th centuries before Christ. A huge change took place. Fierce nomadic tribes started coming down from the cold north to this rocky, mountainous plateau. They came from the endless steppes of Central Asia and the rough Caucasus Mountains. They were part of a huge family of Indo-European nations, and they were part of the very different Indo-Iranian branch. And here is a fact that will completely change how you see the world. Their old, harsh language was closely related to Latin. It was related to ancient Greek. It has a lot to do with the languages spoken in Europe today, yes. That includes Spanish. And yes, that does include the English language you are now hearing. When these tough travelers settled on these beautiful lands, they started calling themselves Aryans, which means noble in music. They proudly named their new home Aryan Vaya, which means the land of the Aryans. As time went on and language changed, this old phrase turned into the well-known powerful name we all know today as Iran. They started to mix with the very advanced Elon culture from long ago. They broke up into huge alliances after this strong combination. The MES and the Persians were the most famous and scary of these groups. It was here, in the middle of these harsh, unforgiving mountains and hot deserts, that the Iranian people came up with their most powerful weapon. Pay close attention, because this weapon wasn't a fleet of heavy war chariots. It wasn't a new kind of armor or a special bow that could break armor. Their strongest weapon was their ideas. They made a virus for the mind. A brand new religion was born on the Iranian plateau long before Christianity spread like wildfire, and long before Islam rose to power. It was a belief system that took over people's minds and turned them completely upside down. Zoroastrianism was the name. Life for the ancient Iranian was no longer just a series of random, meaningless events. You didn't just live, farm, and die in a boring, never-ending cycle of seasons. No. The whole universe suddenly looked like a huge, violent battlefield. There was no way to stop the war between two huge forces. Ahura Mazda, the brilliant, transcendent god of perfect order, absolute light, and pure truth, stood on one side. Iman, the scary spirit of total evil, poisonous lies, and suffocating darkness, was on the other side. And most importantly, this great religion made it very clear where this evil was in the real world. They were afraid of more than just demons in the sky. They told us exactly where the dark parts of the earth were. People thought that Tran, a wild, nomadic area in Eurasia, was the realm of darkness. From this dark wasteland, bloody raids that killed many people were always happening against the peaceful Iranian cities. So, being Iranian meant more than just being a citizen. It meant being a real warrior of light. The idea of actively helping the cosmic forces of good was at the heart of their whole culture, including their beautiful poetry, music, and strict statehood. This amazing idea brought the country together in a way that could never be broken. But Zoroastrianism did something even bigger, something that controls your mind right now. This old tradition was the first in history to say that time doesn't move in a circle. Before this, everyone thought that history just went on and on and on. But the Iranians said no, time goes in a straight line. Time is a line that goes straight. They said that the world had a clear start, a moment of creation, and because it started, it will have a terrifying end. That is certain. They said that there would be a last battle between light and dark that would shake the earth. They talked about how fire would cleanse the whole world, and how there would be a final judgment that no one could escape. How did this one thought take over the whole world when the strong Persians took over the great city of Babylon in the 6th century BC? They did something shocking. They freed the Jews who had been stuck there in terrible conditions for 200 years. Judea was a very safe part of the Persian Empire. During this long time of very close contact, Brilliant Jewish thinkers learned a lot about Persian culture from their protectors. They took on the Zoroastrian way of life, which included always being ready for the end of the world. They accepted the idea of linear time and the scary idea of a final judgment. This huge philosophical idea later became the basis for Christianity and then Islam. Famous modern philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche have said that Iran was the most important place for finding linear time. They made the very points of reference that you and I still use today. With this deep understanding of the world, they started to build the Median Empire, which was formed in 670 BC, was the first real great state of the Aryans. The MES didn't last long, but they did something scary. They were able to completely destroy the powerful and bloodthirsty Assyrian Empire, but their rule didn't last long because their own close relatives, the Persians, were too strong. In the year 550 BC, a brilliant visionary named Cyrus the Great, who was half Persian and half Greek, was able to bring together his two fiercely independent peoples. He started to build what modern historians would later call the Achaemenid Empire. Out of this strong union, this was more than just a big kingdom in the history of music. This was the first real superpower. Cyrus was not like the cruel, mindless tyrants of the past. He didn't act like a monster when he took over the rich kingdom of Lydia, the brilliant Greek city-states of Asia Minor, or the famous city of Babylon. He didn't tear down their holy temples. He didn't put chains on their people and make them slaves instead. He did something very smart and manipulative. He built a whole empire on respect. As long as people paid their taxes and stayed loyal, he let them keep their gods, languages, and customs. It was a brilliant move in terms of psychology. People really wanted to be a part of his empire. Darius I, his powerful successor, pushed these huge borders even farther, making the empire reach from the golden sands of Egypt to the lush green Indus Valley. Almost 50 million people lived in Persia at the time. Think about that for a second. That was half of all the people on earth at that time. One king ruled over half of the world. Darius was a brilliant organizer. He split this huge country into 20 huge administrative areas called satrapies. He came up with a great way to collect taxes all at once. He made beautiful heavy gold coins called derricks that made money the same all over the world. And he built a huge, complicated network of smooth roads. The fastest state postal service in the ancient world raced along these roads day and night. But history is a harsh teacher, and it never forgives weakness or too much confidence. Cyrus the Great went deep into Central Asia in a desperate and deadly attempt to protect his huge empire from the terrifying nomadic darkness of the north. He went to fight the Massageti, a wild and untamed tribe, in a final, decisive war, and there, the world's biggest and strongest emperor met his sad end. The fight was so brutal that it killed every single soldier in the huge Persian army. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, the fierce leader of the Massageti, a terrifying warrior queen named Tamiris, was seeking deeply personal revenge for the death of her beloved son. She told the men who were still alive to search the bloody battlefield for Cyrus's dead body. She cut off his head when they found him. Then she put it in a heavy leather bag that was full to the brim with human blood. She looked down at the dead king of the world and said, "You wanted blood, now drink your fill." Even though this was a terrible tragedy, the huge empire did not fall. It lived on, and it was stronger than ever in the West. We are now heavily conditioned to believe a very specific, highly romanticized story. We usually think that the famous Greco-Persian wars and the legendary battles at Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans fought, completely destroyed the Persian war machine. I have to tell you the truth. That is a Western myth, yes. The Greeks did bravely fight for their immediate freedom, but for the giant Achaemenid Empire that spanned the whole world, losing a few small cities on the edge of the map was nothing. It was like a small mosquito bite on the back of a huge elephant. The Persians didn't freak out. They just changed how they did things. They used dark psychology and a lot of money. They stopped fighting the Greeks and started giving them money. They would send gold chests to Athens and then send gold chests to Sparta. They set the fierce Greeks against each other on purpose, watching them bleed themselves dry in pointless, never-ending civil wars. In the end, their clever manipulation worked. The Greeks, who were completely worn out and hurt, had to kneel down in the year 387 before Christ. They had to sign a humiliating treaty that was completely in line with the strict rules set by the Persian king Artaxerxes. The powerful Persians couldn't take what they wanted with a huge bloody army, so they just bought it without firing a single shot. Persia became the undisputed ruler of Greece, but the real disaster that shook the world happened a little later. The Achaemenid Empire got so big and bloated that the weak central government in the capital couldn't keep track of dozens of completely different nations anymore. A young, very ambitious, and completely heartless king from Macedonia saw this weakness and used it to his full advantage. Alexander was his name. In 330 BC. Alexander's highly disciplined and unstoppable Macedonian phalanxes crushed the divided Persian army without mercy. Alexander was so drunk on his own power and victory that he ordered the beautiful city of Pippolos to be burned to the ground. It really did seem like Iran's long history was over when the huge stone columns fell and the sky turned red with the end of a dream that had lasted for 1,000 years. From the smoking ruins of the Achaemenids came a new Hellenistic state, the Safavid Empire, which was entirely ruled by Greeks from other countries. But do you remember the trap I told you about at the start of this video? That's when the scary Iranian survival mechanism really kicked into high gear. The proud Western conquerors were slowly eaten up by the ancient Eastern culture. The man who burned their city, Alexander, slowly began to act like them. He started dressing in fancy Persian clothes. He followed the strict and detailed rules of the Persian court. He told his Greek generals to bow to him in the same way that Persians do. The huge Greek policy of Hellenization, which forced everyone to be Greek, completely choked on the thick, intoxicating ancient Iranian worldview. The Parthians, a very fierce Indo-Iranian tribe, had seen enough. By the 3rd century BC. They violently kicked the Greeks out of the area and built the huge Parthian Empire. The strong Parthian ruler Mithridates proudly called himself the King of Kings and the rightful heir to the ancient Achaemenids. For 5 long, bloody centuries, the Parthians stood their ground, relying on highly mobile, lightning-fast cavalry and the deadly legendary Parthian shot, which shot arrows backward while riding away at full speed. They were able to defeat the Roman Empire, which was the most powerful military force on earth, over and over again. They beat the Roman legions in the dry sands of the Middle East in ways that were humiliating and devastating. Then, in the year 224, a new golden age began that was very bright. The strong Sassanid dynasty took full control. They came directly from the Fars region, which was the ancient sacred homeland of the first Persians. They built a very centralized and strict state. The ancient religion of Zoroastrianism became the strict official state doctrine during the Sassanids' rule. Society was very strictly divided into strict groups. The only priests, the brave warriors, the smart bureaucrats, and the hard-working people. They set up a meritocracy that was almost perfect and worked very well. There was no doubt that Sassanid Iran was a global superpower. But being a superpower means that you are always a target for almost 400 years. They fought long, hard wars that wore them out. First, they fought with Rome for a long time, and then they fought with the strong Byzantine Empire, killing each other over who would have complete control of Mesopotamia and the rough Caucasus Mountains. These centuries of constant, brutal war drained the Iranian nation completely. By the middle of the 7th century, the Sassanid Empire, which had once been unbeatable, was just a huge, bleeding giant. The Arab Caliphate, a new and terrifying force that had never been seen before, came out of the hot, dry deserts of the Arabian Peninsula to take advantage of this weakness. The great Persian capital finally fell in the year 651. The last ruling Ashache of the old Sassanid dynasty was killed in a cruel and treacherous way. The whole of Iran was heavily ruled by foreign Arabs. Umayyad Caliphate entered a dark time. The Arabs who came to invade brought with them a strong new religion, Islam, and a language that was completely different from any other. The ancient flames of Zoroastrianism, which had burned brightly in the hearts of Iranians for thousands of years, finally started to flicker and fade. This would have meant the complete loss of their identity for any other culture on earth. This is what happened to ancient Egypt's music. It is what happened to Syria. They lost their old languages forever when they were conquered, and their music became completely Arabized. The Persians did it again. Though the trap closed, different strong Arab leaders tried to violently make the Persians give up their deep roots for good. But even though they lost the war, the smart Iranians fought back in a cultural way. It was a counterattack that was quiet and unseen. The huge Islamic Caliphate, especially when the Abbasids were in charge, realized they didn't know how to run a world empire, so they started to depend on highly educated Persian bureaucrats, brilliant scholars, and visionary poets, almost to the point of desperation. The strong Arab caliphs took over the old Persian ways of running things. They began to act like the kings of Persia. The beautiful Farsi language didn't just live through the invasion, it did well. It lasted longer than many huge empires, and the best scientific papers, mathematical discoveries, and beautiful poems in the Islamic world were still written in Persian. They lost the throne, but they had complete control over the empire's mind. But history still had more tests for them after the Arabs. A terrible apocalypse that no one could have imagined hit Iran hard in 1220. The worst thing that could happen in the ancient world came from the cold steppes of Central Asia. Genghis Khan and the scary Mongols didn't just take over land. They wiped it out. They killed everyone in huge cities without a second thought. They deliberately destroyed irrigation systems that had been saving lives for thousands of years. It really looked like Iran would be completely destroyed and turned into nothing but an empty grassy field for horses to roam. But then the Iranian plateau worked its magic again. When the fierce grandson of Genghis Khan, a man named Hulagu, officially set up a permanent Mongol state he called the Achaemenid, something that was almost funny happened. These brutal, harsh conquerors, who were used to living in simple tents and drinking horse blood, suddenly converted to Islam. They made the soft, poetic Persian language the official language of their scary country. They started using the money they stole to build huge, beautiful Persian mosques with huge, glowing blue domes. They began to give a lot of money to Iranian poets, artists, and scholars in their own country. This strange pattern in history happened again at the end of the 14th century. The terrifying conqueror Tamerlane violently stormed into these lands. He actually built terrifying pyramids out of severed human heads to scare his enemies. But at the same time, this cruel warlord was completely silent in awe of the beautiful Persian culture. He purposely spared the best Iranian artists and brought them back to his own capital. His descendants, who are known as the Timurids, eventually started a real Persian renaissance. Their powerful royal courts became the centers of beautiful poetry and miniature paintings. For almost 300 years, Iran was a violent, chaotic place where the Mongols and Turks had all the political power. But when these fierce outsiders took the golden Iranian throne, they completely and permanently became Persians in just a few short generations. The deeply ingrained Iranian cultural code was like a virus on a computer. It completely changed the minds of the people who invaded it. And then, in the year 1501, a brilliant, highly driven man named Shah Ismail suddenly appeared in this terrifying 3-year cauldron of warring tribes and changing dynasties. He violently brought together the broken country and officially started the strong Safavid state. The Safavids made a choice that would change the Middle East for all time. They made Shia Islam the official state religion of Iran, and it was very strict. This brave move set them apart from the rest of the huge, mostly Sunni Islamic world, both culturally and politically. It also set them apart from their bitter enemies, the powerful Ottoman Empire. Iran had once again aggressively forged its own rigid, incredibly unique identity. They were by themselves, but they were strong. But by the time the Turkar dynasty took over in the 19th century, Iran was going through a very dark time of crisis that was hard to deal with. After a series of terrible, very destructive wars with the huge Russian Empire, the country lost control of the rich areas that are now Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan for good. By the early 1900s, right before the First World War, Iran had sadly become nothing more than a helpless backdrop for the great game. The British and Russian empires were in a huge, high-stakes standoff over this. The once proud country was brutally divided into quiet spheres of influence. The British aggressively pumped millions of barrels of valuable Iranian oil to fuel their huge navy, and heavily armed Russian troops stood threateningly in the north later. The strong Soviet Union even tried to violently create a fake puppet communist republic in northern Iran. The ancient country was slowly dying, being crushed to death by the huge, heavy weight of huge colonial powers. But Iran wouldn't be Iran if it didn't find a clever, totally surprising way to get out of a bind in 1925. The strong, no-nonsense military man named Reza Shah Pahlavi took over as the leader of the country. After a quick military coup, he immediately set a hard line, aggressive path toward quick industrialization and strict modernization. In 1935, he made a psychological move that completely changed the way that global diplomacy worked. For hundreds of years, the whole Western world stubbornly called this beautiful country Persia. This word comes from the ancient Greek name for the Pars region. But in the minds of people in Europe and America, the word Persia was strongly linked to childish fairy tales, magic flying carpets, technological backwardness, and a strange weak exoticism. Razasha hit the table with his fist and said, "That's enough." He sent a very strict, very official order to every foreign embassy on earth. He told them, from this moment on, this country must be formally called by its true, very old name, the name they had proudly called themselves for thousands of years: Iran, the land of the Aryans. This wasn't just a random idea about language, it was a huge, violent psychological message to the world. He was telling the world, we are not your strange, backwards colony. We are a modern, very powerful nation with roots that go back thousands of years. You will have to deal with us. Iran's long, bloody history is always full of sudden, radical changes. In the 20th century, the country was once again stuck on the huge global chessboard, caught in the middle of the selfish interests of huge nuclear-armed superpowers. After decades of political unrest, anger over music, and constant interference from other countries, the country finally exploded in the huge Islamic Revolution of 1979. The old monarchy completely fell apart. Iran became a strict theocratic republic, and its long-standing ties with the West were cut off violently and permanently. And because of all of this, we have to see a historical paradox that is almost too amazing to be true. There are two completely different, contradictory states in the mind of a modern person at the same time. Most people think of dark images of heavy geopolitical tension, harsh economic sanctions, endless military conflicts, and scary daily news reports when they hear the word Iran. The old word Persia, on the other hand, is still very much in our minds. It has somehow gained a deeply romantic, almost completely made-up quality. People often think of Persia when they think of lost beauty, highly polished emotional poetry, magical fairy tale empires, and stunning art. It is two names for one amazing piece of land. And there is a constant, never-ending mental battle about how people will remember this place in the future. This very complicated culture has been around for 5,000 years and has created the best way to survive. Music when they fought with heavily armed Macedonians, fanatical Arabs, or bloodthirsty Mongols. They didn't just give up and go away. They did what seemed impossible. They took in their conquerors and quietly changed the minds of their enemies to fit their own ancient mold. They were proud to be at the very beginning of human civilization. And they came up with the idea of the time we live in now. But maybe their biggest and scariest battle is going on right now. At this very moment, there is a quiet, invisible war going on in some countries that people don't know about. A mental battle between who we were long ago, who we are now, and how the rest of the world wants to see us. Thanks for joining us today as we looked into the dark parts of history. If this trip changed how you see the world, please click the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us which ancient empire you want us to decode next. Until next time, keep looking back. You are looking at the city.